Hi class, in this video I'm going to work a few examples from section 6.1. This is factoring the greatest common factor and factoring by grouping. In this example it says find the greatest common factor of the expressions. We have two expressions separated by a comma, and we're just looking to see the largest number they have in common and then how many variables they have in common. If we first look at the coefficient 24 and negative 32, they are both divisible by 8. And so that would be 8 divided into 24 is 3 times, and 8 into 32 is 4 times. So 8 is the largest coefficient. So I'm going to write that over here. Next, in order to figure out the common variables, they always have the smallest exponent in common. So for example, there's y to the 13th power and y to the 7th. The most they have in common is y to the 7th, and then they have z to the 4th. And so that is the greatest common factor of these two expressions. This example says factor out the greatest common monomial factor from the polynomial. Now that it's a polynomial format, we'll write the greatest common factor, and then we'll write the binomial back inside of a parenthesis. So the first thing we'll do is figure out the greatest common factor. And if you look at the coefficients 3 and 9, 3 is the greatest common coefficient between 3 and 9, and then they share z to the 4th. And so how we'll write this answer is we'll go ahead and put 3z to the 4th, but then I want you to open up a set of parentheses and rewrite this original binomial after you've divided out 3z to the 4th. So for example, 3z to the 6th divided by 3z to the 4th is z squared, and then 9z to the 4th, when you divide by the greatest common factor, you get a positive 3. And so this, with the greatest common factor and the set of parentheses, is your final answer. In this problem, it's asked us to factor out a common monomial, but this time the key word is negative. So all that means is when you do find the greatest common factor, just to pull out a negative with it. So for example, looking at these terms, they are all even. They do not share an x term, and so we'll say negative 2. I'm also going to put this in descending order as I write this. So I'm going to start with this last term and make it first. If I divide by a negative 2, I'll have x squared. Next, if I divide 8x, divide by a negative 2, that's negative 4x. And then 4 divided by negative 2 is negative 2. So the final answer that you would type in is negative 2 times the trinomial x squared minus 4x minus 2. In this example, it's factor the polynomial by grouping. This is a special kind of factoring where the greatest common factor is not a monomial, it's a binomial. And for this first problem, hopefully it'll be pretty easy. Do you see that in the binomial, they share a common binomial? And I put this square around it. So the term x and the term 5, they both have in common a parentheses x plus 3. So that's going to be the greatest common factor, x plus 3. And because it's a binomial, that's the reason we need the grouping parentheses. So we'll group x plus 3 together. And then when you divide the first term by x plus 3, you're left with just an x. And when you divide the second term by x plus 3, you're left with a positive 5. And then we're going to put that in a set of parentheses. So you have two parentheses for your answer. You have parentheses x plus 3 times parentheses x plus 5. This is the last example on this video. We're going to factor the polynomial by grouping. So it's the same method as the previous problem, but do you see that there's no parentheses in this problem? So we're going to start this problem a little differently than we did the previous one. I want you to draw parentheses around the first two terms and then draw parentheses around the second two terms. Next, I want you to take the first two terms and find a common factor between just those two terms. This first one would be an x, and then once you divide each of these terms by an x, you'd be left with x plus 3. Okay, and then we're going to do the same thing with the last two terms. It was 2x plus 6, and they both share a 2. When you divide this binomial by 2, you have x plus 3. And so now if I were to bring these two parts back together, it would look like this. It would be x times x plus 3, a positive 2 times x plus 3. And now it's written in a format like the previous problem. Do you see that this is another binomial, but within the binomial there's a common binomial? That's the greatest common factor when you bring those two terms back together. And so how you would write your answer is you would put the x plus 3 first in a set of parentheses. That's the new greatest common factor. And then in a second parenthesis, you would put x plus 2. In parentheses, x plus 3 times x plus 2 is your final answer. That's all for this video, but if you have any questions on this homework assignment, please let me know.